I'm Carol Shaw. I've been a producer for a long time. I'm going to talk like years, like 15 years or something. I'm going to talk about different specializations in production today. And specifically, I'm going to give you, it's a more pragmatic and practical presentation about the seemingly endless new and different types of production roles and how to match up a particular role with your skills and interests. So this is more about, you don't want to just be a general producer, but you have maybe something special great at, and you want to figure out how to leverage that into a specialized production role. It's also a talk about how to adapt your production style, this is all about style, to different situations before and during and after development. And it's also a talk about production methodologies and how to work with them when you start a new project or join a project that's already in. So this one represents Agile, and we're also going to talk a little about waterfall. I'm going to adjust one thing really quick. Or I'm not, but that's cool. In larger projects, we're going to dig right in. In larger projects, producers end up supporting many different disciplines. In smaller projects, they can support many multiple areas. When I joined Spore as a producer, I was managing lots of different parts of the project, but by the end of the project, after we'd ramped the team up, I had moved my interests into the two areas where I had more expertise. So I had some time while the project was spinning up to work on lots of different areas, but by the end of it, I was fairly specialized and working mostly with the online components and working with PR and marketing. So I was a producer that was a little bit more focused looking outward from the project rather than looking inward at the project. The four primary areas we're going to talk about disciplines regarding disciplines in game development are going to be art, and that includes both external outsourced art, internal art, and UI. We're going to talk a little bit about engineering. Oh, there it goes. That's what engineers look like when they code. Producers didn't know that. We're going to talk a little bit about design and production for design, specific production for design, and we're going to talk about online. And it's kind of hard to see that slide, but it's a slide of available servers for an online game. Before we jump into all that, though, I want to talk about the different gradations of game development within organizational structures. So initially, whoa, hey guy. Initially, you have a game. It's a single game or a single project based around one IP. And that's kind of the most fundamental project that would need some sort of production help. A good example, I mean, there's a million of them, but like Gone Home is one game by one studio that is about one IP. But then you start adding in other things, and you have a franchise. So this would be multiple games or products that are related to one specific franchise. So this is a good example I like to use is The Sims, which I worked on as well. And that one's a game where there's multiple iterations of The Sims. There's Sims 1 and Sims 2 and Sims 4 and maybe a Sims 7. And then there's all of the content packs that come along with it. Franchise. Oh, hey. That's going to be a franchise, so that's going to be multiple products that are based around one IP. When you add a bunch of those together, what you end up with is a studio. So that's going to be multiple games or projects based around multiple IPs. So a good studio that's an example of that, I think, is Double Fine. So they released Psychonauts 1 years ago. They're working on Psychonauts 2. They just released a VR product that's Psychonauts and the Rhombus of Ruin. So that you can look at them and say they have, and then they have other one-off games like Broken Age and Headlander that they made that, sorry, I have a little bit of a sore throat because it's GDC, so hang on. So you can look at them and understand that they're more of a studio with different IPs with different products around them. And then next, you end up, if you have lots of different studios that are all grouped together, that's more of a corporate entity. That's going to be something like an EA. So within EA, there's a lot of different studios. So one example is Visceral, but Visceral has many projects that have multiple games based around individual franchises, but also do multiple franchises. So Visceral does Dead Space, and there's multiple Dead Spaces. They did Godfather, there was multiple Godfathers. But they also have BioWare is also part of EA, and they have Mass Effect and all the Mass Effect products, and then they have Dragon Age and all the Dragon Age products. So that's what you kind of get up to the corporate level. And then next, This is supposed to represent publishing, which I had a really hard time figuring out how to represent a publishing producer. But publishing, a video game publisher is a company that publishes video games that they've either developed internally or they publish those created by an independent video game developer. So they might draw in games from other studios that they help publish. And typically they manage the marketing. Sometimes they help out with the QA and user experience testing. And they often handle distribution. So, you know, Sony and Microsoft have big publishing arms. So they're big corporate entities that have multiple internal game studios typically. They also make hardware, but they also have a publishing arm, and you'll see stuff published by Sony, like Journey was published by Sony, if you played that game, which should. It's a great game. Now that you have a good overview of what the different corporate structure of all the different all the different game development opportunities that are out there, what I want to start doing is talking about the different specializations that you'll find within some of those different companies. And basically, I'm going to go through it the way I talked about those disciplines, so art, engineering, design, and online. And we're going to talk about the different specializations of producers within those different disciplines. So we're going to start with art outsourcing producer, which is a very specialized version of an art producer. Typically, art can be produced in lots of different ways, and very few, unless they're very small studios, produce all their own art anymore. Often they outsource art to cheaper overseas organizations. Doesn't matter where you live, somebody is always going to be overseas from you. And basically, they need somebody who's going to run that part of the business. So the things that you're going to spend your time in if you do an art outsourcing producer job, you're going to be in email a lot. You're going to be in Excel a lot, both to keep organization of your project, Excel or Google Docs, because you're also going to be worried about the budget. You're going to have to work in all different time zones because you're going to be having calls and meetings to review stuff at all different times. But you're also going to need to have somewhat of an art eye. So you're going to need to be able to give the art director feedback on the art that you're receiving, whether it hits his quality bar, his or her quality bar that you're looking for. Because basically, the art outsourcing producer might say, okay, we're going to do all the concept art internally, and then we're going to outsource the modeling and the rigging, and then we're going to get it back and do all the texturing and animation. So coordinating all of that isn't going to be an artist's job. That's going to be an art outsourcing producer's job to make sure that everything kind of goes down along that path. The skills that you're going to want to bring to that are going to be like a very, very highly attuned attention to detail, because stuff can just get lost, particularly when you're dealing with outsourcing houses that don't necessarily have English as their first language, if English is your first language. But you need to kind of be able to manage that and keep things in order. There's some good and bad things about each one of these, and I talk to a lot of different people. I've never personally been an outsourcing producer, but I have a friend named Sarah who was one for me at another game company that I worked at called Enchimoko. And I asked her what she liked about it, and she said her favorite thing about it was managing the relationships, because she got to meet people from all over the place and help manage the relationship to get something done together as a group. And working with people and understanding their needs and what fulfills them, that was, her reason for wanting to do that job. But, for her, the negative was that she felt really external to the game team. Like, she was often isolated in her work. She didn't really work on the game itself. And that felt somewhat isolating to her, and it wasn't an ideal career path for her. But if you're somebody who's like maybe a little bit more introverted and you like art, but you're not an artist, it could be a pretty good role for you to think about. Next is sort of an art-adjacent producer. You're not an art producer, but UI is a type of art. So you're not doing environment art, you're not doing character art, but UI art's a really important part of the game development process, as anybody who's made a game, unless you've made one that had no UI, which there are some of those that work, but it's really challenging. It's a good challenge. You're going to focus on both 2D and 3D art, typically. You're going to have some experience working with user experience design, and you're probably still going to work with engineers. So I did this job a little bit when I was working at Telltale Games, and I found that it was a really interesting role for me, because I liked working with both artists, the UI artists, and the developers who were actually doing the UI engineering. And I really enjoyed my time there, and my background in doing user experience was super helpful there. So if you've done some user experience learning at some point in your career, this is a really good area because the first time user experience is an extremely important part of the UI process. And I loved working on that. Like for me, I worked with a producer for a while, and she always said like the first 5 minutes of the game, this was more for AAA games, it's more compact for mobile games now, but the first 5 minutes of the game were the most important because that was when the player was going to either play the game or quit the game. So the first time user experience is a really important part of the game to develop. And the UI team is typically in charge of that, entry tutorial. And for me, it was really interesting because I got to mediate a lot of discussions between a UI artist who wanted something beautiful and really cool and really interesting, and the UI engineer who said, yeah, we don't have time and our engine doesn't do that. So you kind of become that person who's the mediator between those two things, and that's the production role you fill there, and you facilitate some sort of an understanding between those two groups so that that you get the best thing that you can for your customers. And it's a really customer-focused role. I think that's what I liked about it. Again, sort of staying in that UI and customer appreciation area, I like to put localization producers here too. That's another very specific, specialized production role. It's really good if you already know multiple languages. It's definitely a role where there's a lot of opportunities. Like I haven't met the game company yet that said if I could find a good localization person, I just wouldn't hire them. Like everybody wants them. They're not easy to come by. Your focus is really going to be working on getting the translations created for the games, probably working with an outsourced house to get that done. And localization integration testing, which is everything from, is the translator giving me stuff that is appropriate for the language of the country? So if it's translated, does it still make sense? And if it's a funny game, does it still funny? If it's a serious game, is the translation still serious, and does it get the same point across? Having a background in QA, or working for one of these translation companies that's out there, both good areas for you to have if you want to go down this road. Although, if you can get a job as an associate producer and tell someone, I also speak Spanish and I'm really interested in localization, you're gonna be fine. Like, people are always looking for localization folks. Again, it's another one of those where attention to detail is probably the most important thing that you can bring to the table, because you're typically going to be managing anywhere from, if you're just doing eFigs, you'll have like 3 or 4 different languages, and I think Spore shipped in like 21 languages, so it's a pretty wide variety of things, and you get some kind of interesting problems, like in Spore, which is a game I worked on for EA. We did it in Thai, and Thai is not a character high, it's a character and a half high. And that really wreaked havoc with the UI of the game, because nothing fit. Like when the translations went in, we're like, oh, that's terrible. And so then you end up working with both the translation team, but you also end up working with the UI team to make the UI dynamic. So you get to work with a bunch of different people, and it can actually be a really interesting job. So one of the things that I think is an awesome piece about doing localization production is it also makes games more accessible for more people, which I think is just cool. Like, I just think that's a really good thing in our industry. For anybody to be able to play any game is just a worthy goal. But I also feel like I only have anecdotal information about this from a couple of the different games I worked on that were highly pirated, is that localizing actually decreases piracy. Because a lot of times people in countries that don't get games in their native language will buy a pirated version that's been done in their language, whereas if you offer it in that language, they will give you money for it, which is so crazy. So I think that there's a big case to be made for localization, and there's a big case to be made for having a dedicated localization producer managing that. Again, this can be a fairly isolating role, though, because you're not typically working on the game features. You might be coming in towards the end of the project, so you might not even see the game while it's in development. And to me, that's also a really fun part of being in game development, is seeing it be super crappy and then get super awesome. So it can be a hard role if you feel like the need to be in on the ground floor of a game development project. So let's shift gears a little bit and start talking about the engineering specialized producers. And we're going to start with director. We're going to start with development director. So development director is a good production specialization path that you can go down if you're a producer. And typically you're going to do this if you're really interested in scheduling and project management. Excuse me. Typically, you're going to be doing things like putting together schedules for projects. You're doing a lot of, use a traffic cop. You're doing a lot of like, you over here get this done, you over there get that done, and you're doing a lot of facilitation of mostly engineers trying to get their jobs done. And it can be a really satisfying role, and I'm going to tell you why in 1 second. I have a friend, a very good friend I've worked with for a long time, who's development director. And I asked her for a reason. I haven't been a development director, so I didn't have like a, why would I love this job? Because I don't actually think I would love the job. So I couldn't make up something there. So I asked her, and I'm going to read you a quote that she gave me. She wrote, "I love working with engineers. One of the great fallacies of engineering is that it's not a creative discipline, and that could not be less true. One of the hallmarks of a great engineer is their ability to function as an elegant thinker who is able to cut to the heart of a problem with efficiency and grace. That takes incredible focus and creativity, and the ability to harass a bunch of brilliant, creative minds to do great work is what gets me out of bed in the morning." And I actually love that quote because it makes me actually think, oh, maybe it would be cool to be a development director. And I think if you can look at engineers, and it's Grace Hopper, Alan Turing, and Ada Lovelace, who are the three engineers that my engineers I work with were like, those are my three favorite engineers that I think are just brilliant. If you can work with those types of minds and get good work out of them, I can imagine that being a fairly satisfying career path. And you're doing a lot of scheduling, and you're keeping things a lot on track. In fact, if things go off track, it's probably going to be seen as your fault. And that's definitely one of the minuses of this whole situation. When things go well, no one really considers why that is. But when things go bad, you're typically holding the bag as the development director. So there's a really high level of responsibility. So this is good role for you if you are interested in scheduling, you're interested in management, you like working with technical brilliant minds, and you like having a high level of responsibility for the success of your project. Like there's a big risk reward payoff in the development director world. Okay, so this is what I do now. I'm a technical program manager for Amazon. I work on the Lumberyard game engine, and I put this in not because I work at a game development company per se. I work for a game engine company, of which there are, quite a few now. Like Lumberyard's only one of them. There's Unity, and there's Crytek, and there's Unreal. So there's a lot of different jobs, and within a lot of large technical companies, there are also a lot of different, more technical roles. When I came to Amazon, they were like, "What do you do?" And I was like, "I'm an executive producer." And they said, "Yeah, well, we don't have that job family here." And I had to sit down with the management and say, like, okay, if you don't have that job family here, let's figure out what my skills are and where they're going to be most applicable. And what we came up with was a technical program manager. And it's a fairly high-level job at Amazon. It's like a career path job. It's not like an entry-level job. And basically, my job means that I manage multiple ongoing interdependent projects across different functional groups. I coordinate roadmaps, I plan releases, I run sprints, I run triages, and I assign bugs to engineers. And I needed to have a basic understanding. This is kind of what got the technical in front of my name, is I needed to have an understanding of how engineers do their jobs, which I have from just years of working with engineers. So again, this is another role where if you like working with engineers and you like seeing everything kind of come together and be wonderful, this is a good one for you. So before I did computer stuff, I was a cook. I was a line cook. I used to take orders and put them up, and I ran the kitchen. So I was the grill cook, and I had the guy on my left who was making salads, and I had the guy on my right who was doing saute pans, and I did all the grilling. And it was my job to make sure that everybody's food came out at exactly the same time and was beautiful. And I kind of think that's what I do in my job now. Basically, I'm coordinating all of the different projects to come together at the same time and get out and be exactly what we want so that our customers will want to keep coming back for more. The other part of my job that I really like that's really the interesting creative piece of my job is that I ensure that like technical design and implementation meet the product requirements. So I work pretty closely with product managers who are coming up with the ideas of things that can be in the product and help make sure that everybody on the project knows the right thing to do to kind of get that outcome. So that's the more satisfying parts of my job. It has some ups and downs. I'll say that about it. I definitely feel like it's not as creative as some of the roles I've held in the past. I'm not doing the product management side, so I'm not creating as much as I have with regards to technical project specs, and that's fine with me because there's other parts of my job that are very challenging, and I love the engineers I work with. I'm not working with artists anymore, and I kind of miss seeing art, and it makes me go out and play more indie games because I just crave sort of seeing wacky, crazy art in my world that I don't see at my job. So, I think when you're being a development director or a technical program manager, you have to kind of commit and say, what I want to do is I want to manage projects and be successful at that, and I need to let go of maybe some of the creative aspects, or maybe I'm not that interested in that. Satisfying for me about game development is getting the job done. So talking a little bit, switching gears again and talking a little bit about online. So mobile product manager is a new sort of avenue for producers to go down. And this is one that's a little more appropriate for most mobile games. Most mobile companies have one or more mobile product managers. And then they tend to be a little bit more focused on things like customer retention, player behavior analysis, things like revenue generation are really big areas of study for mobile product managers. They usually collaborate with designers, so there's a lot of opportunity for them to give some creative input in their job. And they usually have monthly, quarterly, and annual revenue targets. So if you're somebody who thinks, one of the things I really enjoy is having a way to quantify whether my job is going to think I'm successful in my job, there is no better way to do that than to make money for your company. Because people will notice it and you will get credit for it. So if that gives you a lot of satisfaction at work, this is definitely an area for you to consider. If you have a business background, if you're into data analysis, if you like statistical analysis, this is another really good area for you to be in. It's a really good training ground for sort of executive management, not necessarily project management, but executive management, within a small to medium-sized company. One of the ups that I found from working with product managers that they really enjoyed is they spent almost their whole job worrying about customers. So I worry about, am I going to get to the finish line in time? They worry about, is the customer going to get to the finish line in time? And I think that that's a pretty satisfying way to think about your job. Another really important piece of it is, if you're at a small company and you're a good product manager, you're helping pay the bills for the company. So your coworkers can pay their rent and you guys can have pizza and things are good because your product manager is thinking about how to generate revenue all along the way. And that's a really nice feeling to pay rent. I enjoy it. It's a good thing to do. It's also a pretty new area. Mobile hasn't been around that long, and that means that there's a lot of room for innovation and experimentation. So if you're a person who says, I think this might work, and you can make a data analysis that it will work, you can almost always find a manager who's going to say, yeah, let's give it a go. Let's see if your idea works. And they won't all work, but most of the companies that have people like mobile product managers are okay having some measured amount of risk in the types of things that they do, because some stuff works and some stuff doesn't, and if it does work, you have Clash of Clans, so not too bad. The downsides were you really don't necessarily play the game itself on a daily basis. A lot of these are going to be live games that have ongoing new content coming into them, and that might be something that's really important to you. You really want to be able to play the game and have that experience. And you might not have time to do that, so you have to put your trust in the other people that are working on the game. And one of the other people that will be working on the game is the live producer. So this is another online role. I actually did this role for a few years for a company called NG Moco. And your primary job in this role is to make sure that the online game is being updated on a regular basis. So in this world, your game you're not finished when you launch, you're just getting started. You have so much more work to do once customers actually come in. And you're typically worried also about generating online revenue, so you're going to have a product manager that you work with on this. But you're also going to be doing things so you're going to be worrying about money, you're going to be worrying about when is my game going to get approved from the App Store, you're going to be worrying about whether my servers are up, which is that red and yellow. You don't want that much red, trust me, it's not good. And you want to look and see if, how popular are the servers, how are things going. That's just the WoW server list, because that's a great long-term online game. They are experts in live operations. They have lots of live producers at Blizzard. You will need to know some about server management and data operations, so you'll need to understand, like, how are my servers doing? Am I getting enough data back to be able to make decisions about my product? And you're gonna be a conduit. You're gonna be doing a lot of mediation between the designer and the product manager, because the product manager is gonna say, I think this feature is gonna make so much money, and the designer is gonna say, that is terrible. We would never wanna do that to our customers. And you as the live producer are gonna have the opportunity to mediate between those two people. And if you like your team and you have fun working with people, this is a great job for you, because you're gonna be able to use those people skills to help solve problems and help people get their jobs done, which is really what producers do to me. So, for me, this is a server chart from New Relic, and this is just app response time. This is the kind of stuff I used to look at pretty much all day on one of my monitors. And I feel like my job was intrinsically tied to the servers. If the servers were down, two things happened. One is my customers couldn't play my game, which is terrible, and you never want your customers to not be able to play your game. But the other piece was we weren't generating any revenue. If there was no servers capacity, then nobody could get into play and nobody was going to give us any money. And those were not great moments. But what those did give me was an opportunity to work with some really dedicated DevOps professionals. So I worked with some engineers who made it their life's work to try and keep the servers up the best that they could. And when they went down, they did heroic efforts to get them back up. And that was that's like being in the trenches. Like, I've never been to war, I've never been in the military, and it is, I'm sure, not as bad as that. But it is definitely quite an experience to have your servers all go down. I think there was an AWS outage this morning that probably freaked a lot of my coworkers out quite a bit, but I wasn't there, so I have to really about it. I was here at GDC. The other thing that I found really fun about doing online production is that you really are things all the time for your customers, and you get to see, I love working with communities and I love people and seeing what they're doing and getting to see how they're playing your game, and then going onto the forums or Twitter or anywhere and sort of seeing what are they saying, what would they like to see next, and having the opportunity to build those features into a game and having people go, oh my gosh, they actually heard me and listened to me. That was extremely satisfying for me. And in packaged games, you don't get that. In packaged games, you ship, and either if you're digitally distributed or you're a box product, it's out, and there's no changing it. So that was a super fun thing for me, and I feel like being in live production is great for you if you like change, if you're adaptable, if you like working with people, if you get excited when things happen that are beyond your scope of ability to prevent, but that you really are excited about resolving. So I think it's a really fun and exciting area of production that's very different from, if you were a producer 10 years ago on a box game, they just had nothing like that. Next one I want to talk about is publishing producers. So at the end of here's a game and all the way up to the publisher. Publishing producer is a relatively new kind of producer that's been around for a few years. It tends to be a little bit more senior, so this could be interesting to you somewhere down the line in a career if you decide, I like things like traveling and meeting new people and seeing new kinds of games and making money, and I'm really good at a few different things. And I feel like publishers tend to work as a publishing arm of a company. So it'll be either a developer who makes their own games, but also has a publishing arm, or a dedicated game publishing company. And they typically handle things like marketing, distribution, but the publishing producer is going to be able to keep their eye on production all the way through the development of the game to ensure that there's a financial and critical success, because the publisher's only going to make money if the game makes money. You need exceptional people skills for this. So if you decide you want to go become a localization producer because you kind of like swimming in your own lane and working on your own stuff and not talking to a lot of people except on email, then this might not be the job for you. This is a job where you are going to be schmoozing people and going out to do stuff. If you don't like going to parties, please don't become a publishing producer. It will not be a good job for you. You also need a broad understanding of game development. That's why I say it's maybe a job that's for later on in a career, because you'll need to have some sort of knowledge of everything from initial pitch through and including shipping the game and doing after marketing. So you're going to spend a lot of your time doing communication. So you're going to need to be on email a lot. You're probably going to have a couple of different Slack channels for different teams you're working with, and you're going to be a Skype expert. You also need to be super organized. If you aren't organized, you're going to lose track of stuff because you're not necessarily living it day to day. You might work on a project with an external developer, only have every 2 weeks you have things with them, and you need to remember to ask them about it when you talk to them. And lastly, you need to be sort of the paragon of enthusiasm and positivity. So, for a publishing producer, they're out talking to the people that are making these games who are in the trenches, and this is the role where you really want to be the guy or woman who brings along, that like sense of excitement and positivity and that everything's going to be okay because you're helping them make everything okay. I talked to a couple of people. I've never been a publishing producer. I talked to I actually had a whole bunch of people who, when I asked some friends, they go, oh yeah, I was a publishing producer for a while. So I got a lot of feedback on this one from people, and they had a lot of different reasons for wanting to do it. I think it's another one of those jobs that you take on when you want to be thinking about moving into upper management. So they wanted more insight in how decisions were made from above. And then a great quote from one friend was, I've always been a fan of games as a new and relatively unexplored art form, and I want to help those trying to push the medium in new and interesting directions find an audience. And I was like, that is the most lovely altruistic reason I can possibly imagine for being a publishing producer. Good job. That was awesome. But he also said he gets lonely and he misses the creative dynamism of he was a producer before he became a publishing producer and just worked on a game, and he misses it. He misses that dynamism of working with a group because now he mostly works with a bunch of developed studios that are publishing. Another friend of mine said his worst. He loves his job and there's a lot of great stuff he gets to do and he loves delivering good news, but he also has to be the bearer of bad news. And you can really destroy people's dreams if you're a publishing producer, if you pull the plug on their project. And you become the person that has to actually communicate that to somebody. And that's a really terrible place to be, and you have to be able to be okay with that some of the time too, because that's going to be part of the job. Sometimes things are going to go great, sometimes they're not going to go great. As a publishing producer, you have to be prepared for both sides. All right, so I said I'd talk a little about design producer, and here's that moment. I think of design producers as feature producers, and that's pretty much the most traditional type of production that there really is. And I don't want to spend a bunch of time talking about it today, because I think you probably got a lot of information if you were here for Aaron and Ruth's sessions earlier today, and they probably covered most of the ups and downs here, and I don't want to cover stuff that other people already talked about. If you want to talk about this more, I'm happy to. I've done this job. I know lots of people who have done this job, and I can give you some feedback on it. But if you decided to go into production, which I assume most of you in this room did decide that, or you wouldn't be here at the production boot camp, then you probably have a pretty good idea what a feature or design producer does. There are some new types of roles. I worked at Telltale for a while, and they have a design associate. It's kind of like a design producer, except it's more to go in the design track, which I think is a different, other interesting specialization, but I think of that as a design specialization. That's a talk for another day. Okay. So those are the types of specializations that I'm going to cover today, and now I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about how some of these different specializations vary when you're working on a small team versus a large team. So when you're working on a small team, you're pretty much going to wear a lot of different hats. You're going to have the opportunity to try maybe 2 or 3 of these types of specializations. So you might be the art outsourcing, UI, and localization producer on a small team. And that's an interesting way for you to start experiencing the different types of specializations and sort of see what might be appropriate for you. One of the things I like that this represents dive deep, which is an Amazon leadership value. And basically what it means is you will dig in and do whatever needs to be done to get the job done. And I think that's like a hallmark of any producer. But I think that when you're on a small team, it becomes even more valuable as a skill. That you're able to say, I am not super excited, or I am super excited, but I'm going to jump into this task, and even though it's kind of not quite in my bailiwick, I'm going to go for it, and I'm going to try and get something done. One of the downsides to small teams is there's limited growth opportunities. So pretty much if you have like an EP and a senior producer and a couple of producers, there's not a lot of growth opportunity, and there's not a lot of opportunities for really getting in and really becoming a specialized producer. And I feel like that can be okay for a while, but if you do say, like, I really want to be a DD, you're probably going to need to move on and end up in a larger team. Because when you get to a larger team, that's when you start seeing these different types of producers break out and spend all of their time focusing on one specialization. And that's when you can get the best experience out of it and understand what's going to be right for you. There's also, room for growth. You don't feel like, oh, I hope the senior producer wins the lottery, because then maybe he won't come to work again, then I can have his job. But, in a large team, you have a lot more opportunity for movement around. And then if you stretch that out and you become on a large team, but within like a studio that has multiple projects, you can say, oh, I can also move over to that project. Or if you're in a corporate environment, you could actually move over to a completely different studio. I really like BioWare's games, and I've been working on Dead Space, but man, I'd love to work on Mass Effect. Like, that kind of opportunity is there for you as well, especially if you have a specialization and they need it. That's why localization's an awesome one, because there's always room for localization. I'll stop talking about that now. All right. Within that, though, there's a series of hard skills that I think all producers need to bring to the table. And again, different specializations are going to have different hard skills that they focus on. On the left is all the project management stuff that I've had to use in the last couple of years. Project management and communication. This didn't include email. Email producers live and die by email a lot, although I like that Slack is actually starting to take the burden of email off a little bit. It's nice, and it's a little more fun and manageable, but mostly fun. I actually think Slack is pretty fun. But I would become an expert in some of these things. Like, one of the things I learned on one of my first projects that I was working with Jira, and it was years ago when Jira was still pretty early, was somebody made me an admin because I was a producer. That made sense at the time. And I learned how to create workflows in Jira, and it's something that I use to this day. Like, somebody knows they can make me an admin in Jira, and I can probably set up a workflow for them in 15 or 20 minutes and get a project kicked off. And that's just a great skill to have, even though it didn't take me very long to learn, but hardly anyone learns it. So you can go sign up for a free Jira account, and you can learn how to do this on your own. And then you start developing those skills that become part of different specializations. Like, it is a really good skill for a development director to have. It is a really good skill for a TPM to have. Not necessarily a skill a UI producer needs. In the middle are two of the producer's best friends, Excel and Google Sheets. I love Google Sheets. I wish I could use it for everything. We don't really use it much at Amazon, just because, well, it's Google. And so I use Excel a lot, but I love Google Sheets for being able to see projects getting updated. So I worked with an external development shop for a while, and we could have meetings where all of us sat in Google Sheets and we updated it on the fly together live. That's incredibly valuable as a production tool when you're working with distributed teams, which almost all of the production specialists could eventually do. And then over on the far right, those are all of the first-party development platform. So like, if you have to submit to Steam, or you have to submit to iOS or Sony or Microsoft, different specializations have different parts in that role. So it might be that you're the producer who goes and reads how iOS requires you to do your user experience design. Well, that's on the iOS portal. Or you're the producer who, at the end, has to actually submit the app for distribution. That's a completely different other part of the portal, and it's a completely different specialization. But these are all really good things for you to understand. What are the requirements of the first platform holders, and how can I make sure that my area of specialization is doing the right thing so that we don't fail submission because of my stuff. So those are some of the hard skills. There's a lot of different hard skills. I think that we're going to talk a little about development methodologies, and that kind of leans a little bit into the hard skills as well. But I want to talk for just a second about soft skills. Empathy is, at its simplest, awareness of the feelings and emotions of other people. It is the link between self and others, because it is how we as individuals understand what others are experiencing as if we are feeling it ourselves. This is probably the best soft skill that I can tell any producer to bring to any specialization, particularly if you are managing people, and particularly if you are one of the specific producers that is mediating between two different groups. This is an area where you can bring, like, I have in my past been terrible at empathy, like super terrible, and it's been a skill that I've been working on over time, because I think it's a really important production skill for me to be able to say, if that person can't get that done, why is that? Like, what are they feeling, and how are they going through their job that is not enabling them to do their job? So I feel like that's probably one of the biggest soft skills that you can bring to the table in any of the specializations, but particularly the ones where you're mediating between a designer and an engineer, or an executive and an artist. This is a book, you'll be able to see my slides online. This is a really good book about difficult conversations. This is another really good one if you're mediating or managing between different groups, because I feel like this is what producers do a lot if they are the type of producer who's working with groups, not necessarily the ones that are swimming in their own lane as much. One of the other things I think is a really important soft skill for production is team health. I think that no matter who you're working with and which part of the organization that you're working with within your specialization, team health is really important, because if you and your team aren't happy and aren't feeling good about their work and don't have a good work-life balance, that is partly your responsibility, because your job is to get the project out the door, and team health is a huge part of that, and that's become more important as time has gone by, and specialist producers have a really big role to play there. And it's a super fun thing to do. Like, worrying about team health means that you get to plan cool things for people to go do, and I think that can be a really positive experience as a producer. One of the things I use at my current job that's less about ordering pizza, the ordering pizza side of team health, and a little bit more about making sure we're getting the job done team health, because that also is a very positive impact on your team. We use some parts of Agile, and we use some parts of Waterfall. So I'm going to talk a little about the parts of Agile that we use. Anybody used Agile? Everybody, sweet. Has anybody used crazy strict Agile for game development? Wow. Yeah, that's one. So, for me, when I think of how we've used Agile on the projects that I've worked on, these are really the four areas that I tend to use the most. So I like to use user stories for game development, because it makes sure the engineering team is actually thinking about what's right for the user experience and not relying on built as designed, which is my favorite answer as a producer to get from an engineer when I say, yeah, but it doesn't work. Hey, it's built as designed. So, user stories are a great way around that, because you can say, like, the user needs to be able to create an avatar, right? That's a great user story, and then you can flow out everything from that to actually get that work done. I love daily stand-ups, not necessarily because I use them in the strict Agile way, but because I get updates from my team, and it helps me sleep at night. On days when I don't go to my stand-ups, are like my worst days for wondering, like, is the train rolling? Are we getting everything done that we need to get done? I like to use incremental development, and I think that's a really good one for specialized producers in particular, because it helps you figure out, when am I going to be able to give a report about my part of the project to another part of the project, and what's going to be in that. So if you say, like, I know in this sprint we're going to get this amount of work done, I know from previous sprints that we actually get 3/4 of that work done, then I can go out and say, hey, executives or other teammates, here's what I think we'll have done in 2 weeks. And if a combination of the stand-ups and knowing that incremental development in sprints is happening, I as a producer are going to be able to work with other producers and be able to report to my management what's getting done in the project. And personas I really like, and I use them both. I used them a ton when I was doing mobile development, but I use them now, even though I don't share what I do with them to as many people. In mobile development, you use them because you're trying to figure out, like, what are the product features that we need to prioritize based on who's using the product, and you have all the data telling you who's using the product. In my current job, I don't really have that, but I do have the idea of, like, who's using our engine to do what right now, and thinking about those personas and figuring out how to do feature development, even though it's not necessarily tied to revenue, I still find very valuable. Waterfall, this is not the fanciest waterfall slide in the world, but waterfall's pretty basic. It's been around a long time. It's sequential, it's non-iterative. If one thing slips, it causes lots of other things to slip. I tend to rely on it to do upfront schedules because I just want to like when I'm trying to schedule something out, just to get sort of a vague idea, a straw man of when something might be done. But they tend to, I say your mileage may vary when you use waterfall. They're easy to create, but unless somebody's actually really actively updating it, it becomes out of sync pretty quickly. So I tend to, look at that and I say, what I end up doing is I say, I use a combination of these things. It sometimes leads to mayhem and chaos, but what I usually get from it is I take the pieces of Agile that work, I take the pieces of Waterfall that work, I try and combine them and figure out which works best for which specialization I'm doing at that moment. So for live production, my scheduling is completely different than what I do as a TPM at Amazon. So again, your mileage may vary. This is something that you'll adapt for your particular specialization, and you'll have to work with other people on it. Like you have to get your engineers to buy in with whatever production methodology you use, or you will get nowhere really, really fast. So you want to be having those kinds of discussions at the beginning of a product and try and move things along in a way that makes sense for your particular product. All right, last slide, Pusheen, because there should be a cat in every presentation. All right, what should you major in? So if you're in college right now and you're hoping to become a producer someday, you should major in whatever the fuck you want. Basically, I sort of feel like you should also take some engineering classes, but you should major in something that's going to give you a broad knowledge of humans and what we've done with the society that we've had for millions of years. And for production in general, you're going to work with so many different kinds of people doing so many different kinds of things. Having a broad base of knowledge is the best win. I am a terrible artist, which is why I drew not one of my slides. I am really, literally a terrible artist. But I took art history classes because I love art, and that gave me enough information for me to sit down with a game artist and be able to have like a conversation where I don't sound like a complete idiot. And it also makes me enjoy it. Like I have an appreciation for the art that happens in games, even though I can't do it myself. And that's kind of why I think, what should you major in? Really anything. It's what you learn along the way and what you want to bring to the table for the job that you want to have down the line. All right, should you take classes in Agile? Should you take classes in anything? If you want, you should. I don't know that I would take an Agile class. I think there's plenty of information online. And it seems like all of those Agile classes are like, come to San Francisco for an all-day Agile class. I can't think of anything that I would find more boring. Sorry if you teach Agile classes. I think if you're super interested in it and you want to become a super technical project manager, maybe it would be a good thing for you. I still think there's plenty of stuff online. I think there's other classes you can take. Like I took a Java class a few years ago just because I wanted to learn about object-oriented programming. I'm not going to become a programmer. I have no desire to do that at all, although I have tons of respect for programmers. But it just helped me be able to have more intelligent conversations because I had taken a little bit of time and learned a little bit more about something I didn't know about. So I'd say yes, if you want. How do you get into production? So if you're somebody who's not in production now, but you want to be in production, and you don't have any experience and you don't know anybody in the industry, look for an entry-level job. And you might find an entry-level assistant producer job, but it's more likely you'll find something like, a QA job. There's still a few of those that are feeders into a production group. Like I worked at Telltale, they feed people from QA into production all the time there. Or look for like a community manager job, because like most people know how to use social media. Learning how to use social media is, again, something you don't need a class in. You can kind of learn that online. And that leads you down the path of getting a foot in the door. Understanding community and understanding who's playing the game is actually a super valuable producer skill for almost any of the production specializations. So that's a good foot in the door. When you're a producer and you've joined the company, find a mentor. Find somebody in the company that is doing one of these specializations that you're interested in that's more senior than you, and ask them to go to lunch. Take them out to lunch. It'll be worth it. You don't need to have a formal mentor relationship with them, but if you have a relationship where you can ask them a question here or there, they know who you are, they start seeing you around the company, that's a really good thing to foster, and it gives you somebody to talk to about something you're interested in, which is super fun and why we are human beings. Another thing to do when you join a company is finding a champion. And a champion is a little bit different from a mentor because a champion's going to say, I think you're valuable and I want to help you get ahead personally. Like I want, and those do exist, particularly in some of the larger companies. And what they'll do is they'll, work with you, they'll see what you're good at, they'll understand your value, and hopefully they'll help you get ahead within the company. They're definitely harder to find than mentors, but if you find one, take advantage of that relationship and work with them, because it's a great way to learn about a company and learn about how to improve yourself within the company. And that's it. I have some time for questions. If you ask a question, please do it at the mic, because I'm going to lose my voice in about 10 minutes, and I don't want to have to repeat everybody's questions. Hi.
Hi. So first, very helpful, so thank you. So one of the things I've noticed, actually was at Amazon, so I was a TPM at Amazon, and then it's a PM at Microsoft, technical producer someplace else. So how do you kind of like bridge the different titles in different places? Like, how do you kind of like describe your role in a resume when you look for things, kind of like keywords to bridge the things? And then as an addition for that, what do you do if you find yourself at a production role that is very, very specific to the place you're at, and how do you can then advertise yourself to other things or grow into other things?
Yeah, so I think for the first part of that, what I tend to do, it's really easy to write too many things about a job, and I try and look at like the 3 things I do most. So what are the, within a week, what are the 3 things I do most? For me right now, the 3 things I do most are roadmap planning, sprints, and bug triages. So those would be the 3 I'd pick, even though I do a bunch of, I do contract management, I do all this other stuff that I just don't think is as relevant for whatever the next job I want. So what are those 3 things that I do that are gonna resonate in whatever I wanna do next? If you're doing something, is that your first question?
Yep.
Okay, so the second question, with regards to if I'm doing something and I kind of want to go in a different direction for a job that I see that doesn't usually need the skills that I'm working with now and aren't part of my resume, I'd probably try and figure out another way to get some of those skills, and that might be participating in a hackathon or a game jam, and say, go to a game jam and say, I really want to be the person who helps pull together all the art. Because I've never done art, but I think art would be more interesting than, localization. So try and find the experience somewhere else if you can't find it within your own company.
Thank you.
On your last slide, you had bullet points about finding someone to mentor or champion you as a young producer. Do you have any advice for people who want to get into mentoring or champion people less experienced than them?
Yeah, I think that if you're at a company that's big enough, go talk to HR. And say you want to spearhead that. It could be as easy as if you have an internal spam list that's I'm selling my cat carrier. It could be just as easy to say I'm looking to mentor. Here's the 3 things that I do most with my job. But HR typically also has people who might be interested and might be able to help you do that if your company has an HR person.
What if you don't have an HR person?
You don't have an HR person? Well, do you have a company spam list?
Yeah.
Ah, there you go. Yeah. Or ask managers. Ask other managers, too. Hi.
Hi. My question was about mentors and finding a champion. Do you think it's appropriate if that ends up being the same person, or would it be better to have it be 2 separate people?
I kind of would end up thinking it's 2 separate people, because I think, the champion, you want to be the highest person in the company that you can get. And the mentor, you really want to be somebody that's in a discipline area you want. And it's not necessarily that's, if it's the same person, that's fine. But I don't know how that would work. I don't know that many companies where the same person is a senior, unless it's you want to go into marketing and you want the CMO and they also are I think you'd be great in marketing or whatever. So I don't think it would work out that it would happen very often, but I don't think that there's a problem with it if it did work out that way.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Hi.
Hello. First of all, thank you for my young producer. My question is, you touched a little bit about Agile classes, but what are your feelings and thoughts about Agile, Scrum, project management certifications? Are they worth it?
I think in tech companies they might be a little bit more worth it. I'm not sure they are in game companies, just because I just don't know that many game companies that use strict Agile. Scrum techniques. Like they need just to be modified. And I think that's because games, unlike software, games actually need to be fun. And I actually don't know I don't think Agile Scrum actually addresses like the fun factor of games very well. So I think that a lot of companies try and use it to the best extent they can, but then have to veer off at the point when they're like, once you get all those independent pieces together at the end of Scrum, in technical software, that's fine. Like your accounting software, it's great. 2 and 2 does equal 4. I'm done. But in a game that just rarely happens. Like when you get to beta in a game, you're like, oh, actually, not so fun. That's bad. So I don't know if the certification matters so much in games as it might in other areas. That said, I know people who have gotten it, and I guess it sort of depends on who's hiring you and what you bring to the table from that training. I think you'd probably want to be able to articulate what you got out of it pretty thoroughly.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Hi.
Hi. On one slide you had a bullet point about personas. Can you just touch on that real fast again? What is that?
Oh, personas. Oh, sorry. It's basically a fictional biography of a typical user. So a persona might be, like in the case, like a whale in a mobile game is a persona. You'd be like, oh, it's somebody who plays the game X amount of time, spends X amount of money over X amount of time, and sort of fits that. Or some other persona from a mobile game might be somebody who plays the game X amount of hours but never spends money, but I serve them this many ads, so there's another way to look at them.
So it's some kind of user profile.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's usually fictional. Like you usually sort of create them and then
A name and all that kind of
yeah.
stuff. Okay.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, very interesting talk. I run a small studio down in Costa Rica, and the problem that I have is that I'm not a producer, and my background is computer science, and since we're a small team, I got pulled into the production area of the company.
Yep.
So the image of a game producer, it's non-existent in the Latin American area. So what would be your advice to me in order to try to increase, because we tried working with a remote producer, but it's not working. So what would be an advice just to improve the process that we're having
Are there
right now?
people who call themselves project managers?
No, we're 7 people.
Oh, it's 7 people.
So it's just me and then art and then programming and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in that case you might want to think about ways to get your group to be self-producing so that, I mean, whoever's the lead of the project. So thinking of another friend's small company, and basically if they all are individual contributors, but the person who owns the creative vision of the company needs to have that ownership of this piece needs to fit with this piece, needs to fit with this piece. There has to be somebody who says, I'm going to own that, even if each person is responsible for putting all their own tasks in Jira and making sure the sprints, they put the stuff in the sprint. There still needs to be somebody who sets the sprint up to be populated with tasks. And that probably ends up being the project lead or the founder. Sorry.
Thank you.
Hi. What would be your advice for someone who wants to laterally become a producer in a company that doesn't have a lot of producers?
Is there an acknowledgement that there's a need for producers?
It's kind of like a lot of people act like producers because there's a lot of leadership that, people take initiative and everyone's kind of got their own area they're in control of. But, as somebody who wants to kind of be a producer.
How much overtime do you want to work?
I actually work pretty long hours already.
Okay, I mean, that's really, at the end of the day, and this goes for most jobs, the job that you want needs to become the job that you do. And if you need to do your own job, if you're an artist and you need to still produce all your art, then on top of that, you also need to provide the value that you'd provide as a producer for somebody to see the worth. So it's really hard to convince somebody with words that they need something. You really have to do it with actions. And that's really not a great answer for somebody who's already I'm already working a gazillion hours. So, yeah, but it's really doing the job you want before you have it. It's how to get promotions too.
Yeah, on a following note, I work in a mobile gaming company, and I want to eventually work for AAA console company. in a production role, what's some advice you might have for that kind of transition or marketing myself?
Yeah, that's a hard one I was in AAA and then went to mobile and then came back to AAA. So I think it's a tough jump from mobile to AAA, and I think you probably need to figure out a way, and really one of the biggest differences is the quality of the art and the environments typically is the biggest chasm I've found, and the technology as well, just behind game engines. But you need to figure out a way to get yourself some of that experience. You need to find like a project to work on, again, in your copious amounts of spare time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, good luck. All right, well, thanks very much today.